Well, hello, everybody. My name is Arunpreet Sandhu. I'm a PhD student at UC Davis, working with Josh McCoy at the Sing Lab. And today I'm going to be presenting Setting the Stage using knowledge graphs for environmental context for social characters. So the core idea of this is that the environment is still an underutilized information channel for characters and narratives. But that's still kind of very high level and floaty. So the core of what I'm talking about, or the TLDR, is that if characters are objects, then objects can be characters too. Same with the environment. So why don't we just add a little bit of agency in them as well? In terms of my motivations here, it comes from looking at both prom week and unexplored. Josh McCoy is my advisor, and so I'm intimately familiar with prom week and SIF. But while I was working with prom week, there's a very interesting thing that happened. It was that I was working with all these characters, seeing the great dynamic social ranges that they could have and relationships. But if you look at all of this, you'll see over here, it says choose setting, and the setting is a drop-down. And I have on first-hand authority that there are no predicates within prom week that deal with the setting. So we have this entire additional information channel just not there. And during this time, I was also looking at unexplored in terms of how Joris Stormans brought in Christopher Alexander's work on the theory of place in terms of generating out spaces. So then the question became, we inhabit spaces, and oftentimes spaces carry a lot of social meaning to them. Like, what is a lecture hall versus a coffee shop, and how we interact within them. So the problem then is that character performances are underutilizing the information channel that is the environment. But also on top of that, the environment is underexplored in terms of being an agent. So for the problem decomposition, how can characters utilize the environment more for their performances? How can the environment utilize character information? And what knowledge representation is needed for this perspective system to even work? So I'm going to go ahead and give a perspective idea in terms of a location graph. So right now we're working with a tavern. It's going to become far more clear when Kyle comes up and starts presenting. Within this tavern, there's a barkeep, there's some stages. I don't have enough time to talk about this, so please come bug me during the coffee chat. And at the cards table, the player's sitting there, and we have the shrouded table. And the shrouded table is then used by the narrative manager to spawn in some minions to attack the player. This could increase the drama within the scene. Now, the player needs to defend themselves. And let's say that the best defense right now is, of course, a good offense. But if they don't have a weapon to use, something like we can check the inventory of the player. So we have this defend self function. Maybe they don't have a staff because they're at the cards table. So we look for some tools within the environment. We find some defensive tools. Then from there, look to see what's the closest item and pick it up and start defending ourselves with it. So I'm using binary true or false for defense. It's going to get a lot more complicated in the future. But are there any staves if we say we now look at this location graph with objects in there? There's a broom, there's mops, and there's some mugs. None of these are staves, and there is no staff. But there are things that are kind of like staves within the scene. There's a broom, there's a mop. And if we use an object knowledge graph to then point towards these, we can then get improvised weapons or improvised tools. So a broom could be a staff, a mop could be a staff. So we go ahead and detect those, say like, hey, here are some candidates that we could use. And let's say the broom is the closest to the fighter right now. So bam, we can start defending ourselves with it. To which you're probably thinking now, like, cool, you've just implemented a graph search and smart objects, neat. And I was doing most of this just to prime everybody for kind of what I'm very fascinated about is like, let's improv a little bit. So what if instead of treating the fighter with the defense self functionality and agency, the broom now can do things too? So of course we have this idea of like the broom having attributes, but also the broom having a character sensor. So they could have the function of clean, but it could have the function of improvise as well. And in terms of these improv actions, we could have conditions, much like SIF style rules. And most likely this is currently, I'm thinking about implementing this in a utility system, but I would love to hear ideas if anyone has any of them. So there could be conditions such as like, you have a broom, you have a mop, you're a really strong character. You can dual wield them, why not? Or you have a character has high finesse. And there are throwable objects like mugs in the scene. Well, why don't we start sending events about slinging some mugs with the broom? And so for the perspective applications I'm looking for is modular scenes for modular characters for greater composability and reusability. Environment-driven character generation that is contextually based off of the location that they're in. And continuing from there, co-generating the story with the setting. So looking at the location graph or whatever narrative graph that is currently going on, and then generating the environments for this. Because the blue sky thing that I want to work on is procedural environmental storytelling and dynamic mystery games and detective games. And with that, thank you for listening.
Cool. We do not have any time for questions, I'm afraid, but please do find Arunpreet at the coffee break.
Please, I would love to chat.